The night my son-in-law stood up from the table, straightened his jacket, and told my daughter she had embarrassed him in front of his family. His mother leaned back in her chair and smiled the way people do when they've seen something they've been waiting for. My daughter looked at the floor. She did not cry. She had learned not to. And I sat at the end of that table with 31 years of working homicide investigations behind me, reading the room the way I'd been trained to read crime scenes, slowly, completely, without letting my face tell anyone what I already knew. My name's Vivian Carroll. I'm 63 years old, and I live in a brick house off Route 9 outside of Columbus, Ohio, where the winters come in early and the neighbors keep to themselves. I spent most of my adult life as a senior investigator with the Franklin County Prosecutor's Office. I built cases. I found what people hid. I learned to be patient in a way that most people confuse for passivity. It is not. It is precision. My daughter was 30 years old that autumn. She had grown up watching me work, and she had inherited exactly none of my stillness. She was a talker, a laugher, the kind of woman who cried at commercials and argued loudly about city zoning at neighborhood meetings and kept a running list of every injustice she had witnessed that week. She worked as an occupational therapist at a rehabilitation center on the east side of Columbus, helping people relearn how to button shirts and hold spoons after strokes and accidents. She believed in people's capacity to recover. That belief, I would come to understand, made her vulnerable to a particular kind of predator. She met her husband at a fundraiser for a veterans assistance program downtown. He was 42, a contractor who ran a mid-sized construction company that built commercial properties across central Ohio. He had a firm handshake and a good haircut, and he knew how to ask questions that made you feel like you were the most interesting person in the room. She called me that night and said, "Mom, I met someone and he actually listened." I remember thinking that was a low bar. I did not say so. They dated for 14 months. He proposed on the lake at Allen Creek State Park. She called me from the dock, voice shaking, happy. I told her I was happy too. I meant it. I had not yet learned to read him. The wedding was small, a Saturday in October, her grandmother's garden in Westerville, late enough in the season that the leaves were turning. He cried during the vows. His mother, seated in the front row in a slate-grey blazer, did not. She watched the ceremony the way a person watches a transaction being completed. The dinner that unraveled everything happened 11 months after the wedding, on a Sunday in September. My daughter had insisted on hosting, said she wanted to make her father's chili recipe, the one I had taught her when she was 12, the one that required 2 hours of simmering and 3 kinds of peppers, and patience she had gotten from me, and not from anyone else. The table was set when I arrived. Everything looked correct. Too correct. The kind of careful that tells you someone has been told how things must appear. She hugged me at the door, and her arms were tight, but her shoulders were stiff. She was wearing a long-sleeved linen shirt in the middle of a warm September evening. The kind of warm we get in Ohio right before everything closes down for the year. I noticed. I filed it. His mother arrived 20 minutes later. She lived in Upper Arlington, in a house with a circular driveway and a kitchen she had remodeled twice. She kissed my daughter on the cheek without warmth, and walked into the dining room and commented on the centerpiece. Said it looked rushed. Dinner began the way those dinners always do. Polite surfaces, safe topics. He talked about a commercial project his company had landed in Dublin. His mother talked about property values in her neighborhood and the declining quality of public schools and the general failure of younger generations to maintain standards. My daughter passed the bread and laughed at the right moments and refilled glasses before they were empty and barely touched her own food. Halfway through the meal, she stood to take the chili pot back to the kitchen for more. Her sleeve slipped. Not much, maybe 2 inches above the wrist. Enough. I saw the bruise before she could pull the sleeve back down. Yellow at the edges, which meant it was old. Purple at the center, which meant it was not old enough. She did not look at me. That told me everything. She had hoped I wouldn't see. She had been managing this information for longer than that bruise had existed. He watched me look at it. He said nothing. His mother reached for her wineglass. The table continued as if nothing had happened. I did not say a word. I picked up my spoon. I kept my face exactly where it needed to be, and I began, quietly, to work. Before that dinner, before the sleeve and the bruise and the smile on his mother's face, I had told myself I was imagining things. My daughter had married at 29, later than most of her friends, carefully. She had never been reckless with her heart. After 2 serious relationships that ended cleanly and without drama, she had told me she was waiting for someone who felt like solid ground. When she described him, she used that word, solid. For the first few months, he seemed to be exactly that. He remembered her coffee order. He came to her niece's birthday party and helped inflate balloons for an hour without being asked. When her car needed new brake pads, he drove her to the shop and waited. I noticed those things because I have spent a career noticing things, and they were real. They were not performance. Not yet. The shift was gradual enough that I almost missed it, and I was watching. It started with suggestions about her schedule. Not demands. Suggestions. He said her hours at the rehab center were affecting their evenings. He said her clients drained her energy and she came home depleted, which was unfair to him. He framed it as care. She started leaving earlier, turning down extra shifts she had previously welcomed. Then it was her friendships. Her closest friend from college, a woman she had known for 8 years, lived 20 minutes away. They had dinner together every few weeks, had for years. After the wedding, those dinners became monthly. Then occasional. Then my daughter started saying her friend was going through something, and they were taking space. When I ran into that friend at a grocery store, she hugged me and said, "I miss her. I don't know what happened. I don't know what I did." She hadn't done anything. My daughter's clothing changed in a way she described as maturing her style. Less color. Longer sleeves even in summer. She stopped wearing the silver earrings her father had given her for her 30th birthday because she said they were too flashy for his professional events. His professional events had become the calendar her life organized itself around. She stopped disagreeing with him in front of other people. She had never been someone who avoided a good argument. She argued with me regularly and enjoyed it and was usually right. After the wedding, she began deferring. Not just to him, to everyone around him. She apologized when she hadn't done anything wrong. She second-guessed observations she had made with complete confidence 5 minutes earlier. I told myself she was happy. I told myself I was protective in ways that weren't always useful. I had spent decades cataloguing harm, and sometimes that trained you to see it where it wasn't. I was not seeing it where it wasn't. The first time she almost told me was in February, about 8 months after the wedding. We were sitting in my kitchen after a doctor's appointment I had driven her to. Nothing serious, a routine follow-up, and she was quiet in a way that was not her version of quiet. Her quiet was usually busy, fidgeting, checking her phone, reorganizing whatever was nearby. That afternoon she sat with her hands in her lap and stared at the wall above my sink for long enough that I put down my coffee. I asked her how she was. She said, "Fine." I asked her how she was really. She looked at me, and for a moment I saw the thing behind her eyes that I had seen in conference rooms and courtrooms and the hallways outside hospital rooms. The look of someone deciding how much truth is safe to release. Then her phone buzzed. She looked at the screen and whatever had almost come out of her went back in. He had texted asking when she'd be home. She stood up, kissed my cheek, said she needed to go start dinner. At 4 in the afternoon on a Tuesday, I let her go. I should not have let her go. I have thought about that Tuesday more times than I can count. The bruise at the dinner was not the first. I knew that as soon as I saw it, the way you know the second shoe has dropped because you heard the first one in the ceiling above you 3 months ago and spent every night since waiting. After dinner, I helped my daughter clear the table. He and his mother moved to the living room. I ran the water loud so no one could hear us. And I stood next to my daughter at the sink and I said, Without looking at her, very quietly, I need you to know that whatever is happening, I am not going anywhere, and whatever you tell me will not make me panic. She kept washing the dish in her hands. I said, I saw your arm. She stopped washing. She did not turn around. I said, you don't have to tell me anything tonight, but I need you to know that I have seen this before and I know what comes next if nothing changes. She said, Mom, it's not what you think. I said, okay. She said, he's been under a lot of pressure. The Dublin project ran over budget. His mother has been staying with them more. He gets overwhelmed. I said, I understand. I did not say, I have sat across from men who said exactly those things in depositions. I did not say, overwhelmed does not leave marks shaped like fingers. I did not say any of what I knew, because knowledge delivered at the wrong moment does not open doors. It closes them. I dried a serving bowl and I said, I love you, and I went home. That night I wrote down everything I had observed over the previous 11 months, the dates I could remember, the changes in her behaviour I had witnessed, the friend she had lost, the earrings she had stopped wearing, the Tuesday in February, the bruise, 2 inches above the right wrist, yellow at the edges. I wrote 11 pages, longhand, and put them in a folder in my filing cabinet under a tab I labelled House Records. Then I waited. It did not take long. 3 weeks after the dinner, my daughter called me on a Wednesday morning from a gas station parking lot on Broad Street. She was whispering. I could hear traffic behind her. She said, Mom, I need you to come get me. I don't have time to explain. I was in the car in 4 minutes. She was standing next to a gas pump wearing a coat over what looked like pajamas, holding her purse and nothing else. Her left eye was swollen at the outer corner. Not bruised yet, but swollen in the tight, careful way that means the bruise is coming. I did not gasp. I did not cry. I got out of the car, opened the passenger door, and said, Get in. Let's go. She got in. I drove. For the first 2 miles she didn't speak. Then she said, I knew it was getting worse. I just kept thinking if I did things differently. I said, I know. She said, his mother was there. She watched. I said, I know that too. She said, he's told me afterward I should have kept my voice down, that I provoked him. I said, she was wrong. She started crying then, the kind of crying that sounds like it's been stored for a long time under high pressure. I kept driving. I took her to my house. I made her tea. She didn't drink, and I sat across from her at my kitchen table, and I let her talk until there was nothing left to say. What came out over the next 3 hours was a history I had partially assembled on my own and partially gotten wrong. The first incident had been in January, 2 months after the wedding, not February, when I had almost caught it. A door slammed against her shoulder when she tried to leave a room during an argument. An accident, he said. She believed him. The second time was deliberate. He told her it was her fault for not reading his moods correctly. The third time his mother was in the other room and heard it and came in, not to help but to tell my daughter to lower her voice. The pattern had escalated in small enough increments that each step felt survivable. That is how it works. Not one catastrophic moment that announces itself as a turning point. 100 small recalibrations of what is normal, each one slightly further from the last, until the life you're living doesn't resemble the one you started. She told me she had not called the police because she was afraid of what he would do if it didn't lead anywhere. He had a lawyer on retainer. He had knew people in the county courthouse. He had mentioned both facts to her, casually, more than once. I told her I had known some of those people for 30 years. She looked at me for a long moment. Then she said, What do we do? I said, First, we get you safe. Everything else comes after that. I had a colleague I trusted, a woman who had spent 20 years as a victim advocate before moving into private consulting. I called her that afternoon. She came to my house that evening and sat with my daughter for 2 hours and explained her options in a language that was clear and steady and did not make her feel stupid for having stayed as long as she had. My daughter asked her, "Why do women stay?" She wasn't asking about herself. She was asking about herself. The consultant said, because leaving is the most dangerous moment. Because they've been told so many times that the problem is them, that they start to believe it. Because love and fear can occupy the same space for a very long time before a person can tell them apart. My daughter nodded slowly and said, "That's exactly it." While the consultant talked with my daughter, I made phone calls from my bedroom. I called a family law attorney I had referred clients to for 15 years. I called a former colleague at the prosecutor's office. I asked careful questions. I did not yet have documentation beyond my 11 pages of observations and one morning at a gas station. To build something that would hold, I needed more. What I did not expect was that more would come to me. 4 days after my daughter arrived at my house, I received a message through a professional contact I had worked with years ago, a woman who had consulted on a financial fraud case we'd built in 2019. She said someone had reached out to her looking for a way to get information to me. She said the person was a former employee of his mother's household, a woman who had worked as a housekeeper for 3 years and been let go without explanation or severance 6 months earlier. I met her at a diner on the west side of Columbus on a Thursday afternoon. She was in her 50s, cautious, had driven 40 minutes to meet me. She ordered coffee and held the cup with both hands and said she had been carrying this for 6 months and wasn't sure it was her place to say anything. But then she heard through the network of people who know people that his mother's daughter-in-law had left, and she thought maybe this was the time. She told me what she had seen in that house over 3 years. She told me about the way his mother spoke to the women in her life, the instructions given, the corrections delivered, the control exercised over every detail of everyone around her. She told me about the night my daughter had come to that house with a mark on her arm, and his mother had sat her down at the kitchen table and told her, very calmly, that men who care enough to correct you are worth keeping. She told me about a box of files in the study, documents his mother had kept, papers relating to a lawsuit filed and then withdrawn 7 years ago by a former caretaker who had worked for the family before them. A lawsuit that alleged financial exploitation and intimidation. Settled quietly, records that his mother had retained as insurance, the housekeeper believed, in case the caretaker ever tried again. And she told me one more thing, that his mother had a son before him, an older son from a relationship before her marriage. That son had not spoken to her in 9 years. She had a phone number for him. She had kept it. I called him that evening. He picked up on the 3rd ring, and when I told him why I was calling, he was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "I was wondering when someone would finally call." He lived in Portland now. He had left Ohio at 24 and built a life at a careful distance from everything he had grown up inside of. He told me things over the next hour that I wrote down in a second folder I labeled House Records. 2. He told me about his childhood, about the way his mother managed everyone around her, about the emotional precision of it, about how nothing was ever lost on her and nothing was ever forgiven. He told me she had done to his father what she had helped her younger son do to my daughter, that his father had died of a heart attack at 59, alone in a house that did not feel like his own, a man who had been slowly unmade over 20 years by a woman who called it devotion. He said, "I left because I understood what I was being trained to become." I asked him if he would be willing to write any of this down. He said yes, without hesitation. I want to be clear about what happened next because people sometimes expect this part to look like a movie. It did not look like a movie. It looked like a paperwork. My daughter met with a family law attorney. She filed for divorce. She had documentation from her therapist, whom she had been seeing in secret for 4 months without telling anyone because she had been afraid of what would happen if he found out. That therapist had notes. The notes became part of the record. His mother's counterattack began within 48 hours of the filing. It was sophisticated and it was fast. A rumor appeared in the circle of professional contacts my daughter had maintained from her previous life that she was emotionally unstable, that she had fabricated events. that I was a controlling mother who had orchestrated a campaign against a good man. The rumor was not traceable to any single source. It spread the way those things spread, through the warm channels of people who already wanted to believe it. Her supervisor at the rehabilitation center received an anonymous letter raising concerns about her fitness to work with vulnerable patients. The letter cited no incidents. It cited impressions. I received a call from a former colleague suggesting I be careful about getting involved in family matters that might create professional complications for me, even in retirement. I recognized the strategy: flood the space with noise until the signal disappears. Make the people telling the truth look unstable while the people doing harm look reasonable. I had one advantage. They had not calculated. I was not emotional. I was not acting from anger or grief, though I had both. I was working a case, and I had built cases against people who had far more resources and far better lawyers than a mid-sized contractor from Columbus, Ohio. My daughter wavered twice, once when the letter reached her supervisor and she called me from the parking lot of the rehab center in tears, wondering if going forward was worth what it was costing her. I sat with her in her car and I said, "They are doing exactly what people do when they know the evidence is real. This is not confusion. This is pressure." Those are different things. The second time she wavered was the night she got a voicemail from him. He was crying. He said he loved her. He said he had been under enormous stress. He said he had been under enormous stress. He said he was getting help. He said all the things people say when they realize losing is possible. She played it for me with shaking hands. I said, "Do you want me to tell you what I hear in that message?" She said yes. I said, "I hear someone who is afraid of consequences. That is not the same as someone who has changed." She deleted the voicemail. She did not call him back. What held the case together was not dramatic. It was the combination of small documented truths that each made the whole impossible to dismiss. The therapist's notes, the housekeeper's statement, the oldest son's written account, the attorney who had handled the prior lawsuit against his mother's family, who had kept records of his own and was willing to talk, the photographs my daughter had taken on her phone over the previous 4 months that she had uploaded to a cloud account he did not know about, because she had begun, quietly, in the private part of herself that had not been fully reached, to prepare. She had been preparing before she knew she was preparing. That is what survival looks like from the inside. The divorce was finalized 7 months after she filed. He did not contest it in the end. His attorney advised him not to, once the documentation was assembled. His mother made one attempt at an intermediary, a mutual acquaintance who called my daughter, to suggest a conversation about a private resolution. My daughter thanked her and declined. I will tell you the detail I remember most clearly from that entire period. It was the morning the divorce was finalized. My daughter called me from the courthouse steps. It was March, still cold, the kind of cold that gets under your coat. She said, "Mom, it's done." And then she laughed. Not the careful laugh she had developed over the past 2 years. The one she used when she wasn't sure whether laughter was permitted. Her real laugh. The one she had had at 12 years old, sitting across from her father arguing about whether a movie was good. That laugh. I stood in my kitchen and held the phone and cried in a way I had not allowed myself to cry for the previous 9 months. Because I had work to do, and crying is not always compatible with work. My daughter lives in Clintonville now, a neighborhood in Columbus she chose herself, in an apartment on the 2nd floor with a porch where she grows tomatoes in the summer, even though tomatoes require more attention than they're worth in Ohio. She went back to full-time at the rehabilitation center. Her supervisor, after reviewing the anonymous letter and finding nothing in it that corresponded to any known incident, filed it away and never mentioned it again. She runs on Saturday mornings along the Olentangy Trail. She has had dinner with her college friend every 3 weeks since the spring after the divorce, making up for lost time with a consistency that is a kind of argument. She is seeing someone. She told me about him carefully, over the phone, in the way you tell someone news you're not sure they're ready to receive. She said, "Mum, he's not like that. I said, I know. Tell me about him anyway. She told me about him anyway. She told me. I asked 2 questions. She answered them without hesitation. That told me enough. His mother is no longer in a position to manage other people's lives the way she once was. I will not go into detail about the legal matters that followed, because some of that is still in process, and some of it is not mine to share. What I will say is that people who have operated under the assumption that their social standing protects them are often surprised by how quickly standing evaporates when documentation is clear. As for him, I hope he gets help that is genuine and not strategic. I hope whatever was done to him that he then did to others is the last of it. Hope is what I have left for him, because it takes less energy than anger, and I am 63 years old, and I have learned to spend my energy on things that move. I wrote this because my daughter asked me to. She said, "Mom, there are women watching, and they need to hear it from the mother's side. They need to know that someone older, someone who's seen more, can still miss it, can still tell herself she's imagining things, can still wait when she should have asked sooner." She's right. I missed it. I told myself I was respecting her autonomy when some of what I was really doing was protecting myself from what I would have to do if I admitted what I was seeing. So this is what I want to leave you with. If the person you love starts getting smaller, and they were not small before, ask them why. If they hesitate before they answer a question, they would once have answered without thinking. Notice that. If their sleeves are too long for the weather, do not tell yourself it's fashion. Ask. Not once, gently, and then let it go. Keep asking. Show up in ways that don't require them to be ready. Make yourself the person they can tell the truth to when they finally decide the truth is survivable. And if you are the person wearing the long sleeves, let me tell you something I have learned in 31 years of working with people in the worst moments of their lives. The version of you that existed before the smallness is not gone. It is waiting. It has been waiting the whole time. What city are you watching from? And what part of this story stayed with you?